So we're here to talk to you today about the power of a composite land base, which is kind of a hot topic around the country, so let's get right into it. What do you think is your most GIS-reliant device that you have in your professional life? I would suggest it's probably not your computer. It's probably in your hand, and this isn't the new iPhone. It's out of date, so we need to upgrade already. But how many apps do you have on your smartphone? Probably a lot more than you think that are GIS enabled. I don't know if anybody has used the Find Friends app. It's on all iPhones and it's kind of creepy. If you enable the functions, it allows your friends to real-time track where you are, which is handy in some situations, and it does have a time feature, so you can turn it on for the conference and then it shuts off automatically. Of course, you have Facebook, which you use to check in places and now geotags everything that you do. Twitter functions much the same. Every post is geotagged to your location. You have Runkeeper if you're running and everybody has to know that you're running and exactly where. That will code every step that you take. And of course, one that probably a lot of people have been using around here, Yelp, to try to find restaurants that are near the location that you're in. So there are a lot of apps that are extremely popular now that are using your location. Of course, you also have the ones that everybody thinks of, Apple Maps for getting your directions and if you want to get lost in Australia, and Google Maps, probably a little bit better and a little bit more well used. Now, Google Maps has 100 million monthly mobile users. That's just on their mobile platform alone, not counting desktop. So 100 million mobile users. That's quite a bit. So let's take a look a little bit more at Google Maps. Very popular, everybody uses it all the time, but what is Google Maps when you get down to it? I would suggest that it's part of a land base, and we're here to talk about land bases. So if we zoom into Portsmouth, which is where David and I are from in New Hampshire on the seacoast, let's take a look at the different elements that you find in your land base. So you have, of course, your Google Map background. Then you have your imagery below that. What do you use your imagery for? Well, it's great for locating and mapping things, whether it's pavement or structures or forests or water bodies and a number of other different things. So moving a little bit further, you also have your road network. So fine, that's very good for navigation if you're structured for navigation. You get your street names, your address ranges. You can use pavement management if you're part of a transportation bureau. But this leads to this question of, what about the space in between? What's going on there? What's the ownership? What's the building information? What's the valuation? What's the sales history? From all the data sources we've talked about, you can get none of these. So of course, this is why we bring in the parcels. Now I wanted to discuss a little bit about when we say parcels, what do we mean? Well, a lot of times people mean boundary lines. That's the level of detail that they're at. If you look on Google, many communities have their boundary lines up and loaded to Google. So that's probably the most basic level that people think of when you say parcels. They think boundary lines, and that's probably about it. If you go to kind of the next level, okay, now you're talking about boundary lines and probably a parcel identifier number, which is great. And maybe if you're lucky, you have a small database behind it with a few key attributes. You've got your parcel identifier, your address, maybe you have your land use code. You probably also have your owner and then a couple spatial attributes. So that's great. That's probably what most people are using when they get a parcel map from somebody else. Now what we're talking about when we say parcels is this level of detail. We have the owner's information, the owner's mailing address, complete land use information, complete building information, including the roof type, the interior cladding, condition of the building, number of stories, bedrooms, bathrooms, pretty much all the detail that you can have about the structure we are pulling in, as well as the transaction history. And for a lot of the records, we go back many transactions into the past. And there's also some supplemental, valuation, the value of the structure, the land, et cetera, et cetera. Now all of this information, I don't know how many assessors we have in the room, but is found in the Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal System, or CAMA for short. So we're joining in all of this information into our parcel fabric, such that when you click on a parcel, if you have one record, you get all of this information shown. Or if you click on a condominium, for example, we have the relational database that will give you every owner of record for that one spatial parcel. And it's that many to one, and in some cases where you have boat slips, you actually get many to many. So we take care of all of those relationships and joining in the CAMA database. So again, we're talking about a parcel layer and the CAMA database, which we refer to as the core data set. That's really where everything starts. But we connect many other data sets to that. We get a feed from each of the 10 registries of deeds in New Hampshire on a nightly basis, all of the transactions statewide digitally. We also connect in the mortgage information for all the properties statewide. And since this project is being done through the Department of Revenue, we also link in all of the real estate transfer tax documents, actually as they come in the door, which David will talk about a little bit more in his section. And if you kind of think about having this data together, it's a pretty powerful composite data set. And you can start getting into some pretty sophisticated market predictors since you have the transfer, the valuation, and the mortgage amount. And if you want to know more about this, talk to Brent Jones. This is his favorite topic. Brent already left. So this is what we're referring to as the parcels. Now, if you tie this in with the imagery and the road network, you have what we call a composite land base. So let's talk a little bit about where you would get all of these data sources, because they're not all exactly the same. The imagery, of course, you can get from federal sources, the NAPE image from USDA that everybody's familiar with. In the case of New Hampshire, DOT does flyovers as well that are higher resolution. The road network, of course, you can get from the Census Bureau at the Department of Commerce, or most likely your transportation agency also maintains a road network file. But the parcels are a little bit different. Generally, it's maintained at the local level. In New Hampshire, maintained by our 235 municipalities, most likely where you're from, maintained at the county level. So it's kind of different. You don't have this large data set. You have a bunch of small data sets. Now, this locally maintained data for the parcels works really well at the local level. And really, for years, they've been building and updating the data, whether it's with building permits that change the footprints or deeds that change lot line and ownership. And they've been incorporating that in, usually on a monthly basis, and then distributing this out to the public via their local GIS websites, which have worked really well for the local community. The challenge still remains, though, that you have all of these disparate data sets, and where one map ends and the other one begins, you really have nothing. It's like going off the edge of the world. So that's the challenge that we're really faced with, is how to combine these disparate data sets. And it's kind of a tricky business because everybody's maintaining their own maps in their own ways. So really, it's like making a pie, except you're making it one slice at a time with no coordination at all. And really, everybody expects you to turn all of these separate pieces of pie that they've been baking all by themselves into one seamless, perfect layer with no errors at all and no discrepancies. So it's a pretty tough task. So if we look again at where you get your data, there's a downdraft of data from the larger organizations, the federal and state organizations, your road network and your imagery. So generally with those, you're chopping them up and taking the pieces that you need from a larger whole, which is really not that bad. With the parcels, we talk about an updraft of data because you're taking all of your smaller data sets, stitching them together into a whole, which is really what you're looking for. So it's kind of a different methodology, taking the pieces and putting them together for the parcels. So with that introduction in mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we've done in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire case study, where we turned all of these separate data sets into what we call the New Hampshire Mosaic parcel map. So we are in the Northeast, which makes it a little bit easier. New Hampshire, which when you're very far away is also known as Boston, is just a little bit north of us. We live about 50 miles north of Boston, so about the same distance we are now from Boston. David and I are both from the seacoast. So taking a look at the structure of New Hampshire a little bit, it's 221 towns, 25 locations, which are unincorporated municipalities, 13 cities, and you'll notice there's kind of a scatter shot of the cities, which together make up 235 taxing jurisdictions and roughly 600,000 parcels and 680,000 properties or camera records. And the difference there is the many to ones that I was speaking of for the condo associations and so forth. So now going over to the part of the world that David and I are from, the seacoast. New Hampshire does have a 9-mile seacoast that we stole from Maine quite some time ago. But really the area of the state that we're looking at right now from Manchester south and east is the population center of the state and is really Metro Boston. We have a very, very diverse state. If we now zoom into where David and I are from, Portsmouth, very small, quaint port city. It was actually where the Russo-Japanese War was ended via treaty, the only place in the States that had an international war ended in it. And moving over to the Merrimack River Valley, we have the second largest city in the state, Nashua. And then moving a little bit north, the largest city, Manchester, with about 103,000 people and roughly 30,000 property records. So you have these fairly large cities, but then if I zoom out, and you guys can't see it so clearly, but that lake a little bit up from the bottom, if you go north of that, there's about 40,000 people that live north of that. So we have fairly densely populated urban areas, and then what's called the Great North Woods, which is largely empty. So now if we go back down to the capital city of Concord, which is just 15 miles north of Manchester, I'd like to talk a little bit about the government structure of New Hampshire, which is very colonial and a little unique. So here we have the State House of New Hampshire, which houses our 424-person legislature for 1.3 million people. So we're very, very well represented. They make a whopping $200 a year, so you can guess how invested they are. They are invested. The local government's a little bit different. You've seen the town meetings, the presidential debates. In New Hampshire, we have real town meetings in almost every town where the people show up and verbally get engaged in all the decisions of the local government. The legislative power is really in the hands of the people. The executive power is actually in the hands of a group that they call the selectmen, or the select board, which is essentially a group of town fathers. They're almost all as surly as this. This is a real select board in New Hampshire. And if you want to do anything in town, almost anything at all, you have to stand in front of this group and convince them. So if you want their parcels, they'll say, great, come talk to the selectmen. And that's what you're faced with, which is not always fun. That is a real select board. I think they're actually still active in New Hampshire. We didn't take it though. So here's a map, kind of interesting, of the tax burdens in the country. White states are low tax burden, blue states are high tax burden, and the grays are everybody else. Now you'll notice New Hampshire, we're about 6th in the country for lowest tax burden, and we're nestled in there with all the highest tax burden states though. We have no income tax at all, no sales tax at all. But we do have a property tax, which is where the vast amount of revenue comes from. If you think, boy, you're getting all of your money from a property tax, a couple $1 billion, you'd probably have a pretty robust, mapping system and parcel tracking system. But we didn't. We do now. The reason we didn't have a robust parcel mapping system, even though we're so heavily reliant on property tax, is because there's almost no central organization of GIS in New Hampshire. We have no GIO, although funny tidbit, the IT department took some of the GIS responsibilities Then the head of that department left, and they're now in the process of giving them back. So we had a little bit of direction briefly, but not anymore. There's also minimal collaboration between state government and local government, although that is getting a little bit better. So looking at the GIS landscape, we have the state agencies, the big ones, Department of Transportation and Safety, kind of doing the majority of the big GIS work. Then you have other entities that are kind of floating around. The university, which is where David and I are from, we're the Technology Transfer Center. You have the planning commissions that also do a lot of GIS work. Then you have the vendors, Esri and Autodesk, and the consultants, CAI Technology, CDM, et cetera, that do the majority of the work for the municipal GIS maintainers. But we like to say it's kind of the Wild West of GIS, and the good side is you get to make up all the rules as you go along. So I mentioned David and I are from the university. We're at the Technology Transfer Center at University of New Hampshire. We're essentially a think tank that does government optimization solutions and custom software development. And we generally work with the state agencies, federal highway, a lot of municipal governments, and so forth. Which brings us to what have we done and kind of how did this whole thing get started, the early history of the Mosaic project, we call it. So this is the whole timeline of what we've done, and we'll just zoom in here a little bit. Very early on, in about 05 to 07, the director of the Technology Transfer Center had this idea of a statewide GIS parcel map and started kind of shopping it around to various agencies. With limited success. People just weren't really there yet. So if we move forward a little bit to about 2008, he was finally able to convince the Department of Transportation to do a pilot project to prove that this was even possible. So we took large and small communities and basically knitted them together, 6 taxing jurisdictions, and proved that this was indeed possible, which actually worked out pretty well. But as it turns out, the Department of Transportation didn't really have tremendous interest in continuing it. They didn't see the business need. Step forward to a little bit later in the year, there was an EF2 tornado in New Hampshire that damaged 100 properties in 9 different municipalities. At this time, DRA was asked by the governor's office to go out and assess the damage that was done so that they could apply for federal aid. Of course, the governor assumed that this would be like 2 clicks and they would show up with a damage estimate. Not the case. They had nothing. It took them 2 weeks. They had to recall their entire field staff and get boots on the ground to assess the damage property by property. So 2 weeks is a pretty good timetable to get that done. And that was kind of the impetus of the state realizing, you know, we kind of need to get this together. There's a definite business need. Step 1 year into the future, 2009, new commissioner comes into place. He was formerly of Manchester, our largest city, and instrumental in putting together their GIS program. And this is just a quick screenshot of it. They do have a really nice application. It's very tied in. They have the tax billing that runs through. They have, and you'll see in a minute here, that's the drainage system, that brown line. It's a very integrated public-facing solution. And this is what Commissioner Clarity was used to. He showed up at the state and said, all right, where's my GIS? I said, we don't have anything close to that. And luckily, he was the type of guy that went out to the legislature and got the money to put it in place. So if we move forward about 6 months, he had secured the money January 1, 2009 to what he called the granite to green process. We're the Granite State up in New Hampshire. He wanted to improve the data collection, processing, and business intelligence of the department, and a cornerstone of that project was the Mosaic parcel map to support property appraisal and, sadly, audit and collections, which we don't like to talk about. So that's kind of the early history and where we got, or how we got to where we are today. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to David to talk a little bit more in detail.